Jake. It's nice to meet you if we have not met yet, and I look forward to that opportunity. And we're starting a new series today. Before we get started with it, I just want to tell a little story. A couple months ago, I had the opportunity to visit a friend who he has the new Apple virtual reality headset called the Vision Pro. I don't know if you've heard of this. Yeah. That's what I said. And I was like, I got to try it. So, I tried it out, and it's one of those weird futuristic things where you're with other people, and yet you feel like you're in a completely other reality. And for those of you who haven't tried it or haven't been around it, I want to just give you an example of how it might feel. How dramatic this experience is, and particularly how dramatic it was for my partner Olivia, who, while she was in a group, in a situation where she was sitting next to a group of people, in her experience, she was walking on a tightrope on top of a mountain. So this is an example of what that might look like. Yeah.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Are you scared of heights?
Yeah!
Oh, it's sick.
I can't. Wait, can I hold your hand?
Don't take them off though, because they'll read.
Oh.
I'll have to put them.
Oh my god!
I'm sure she can figure it out.
Oh my god! Oh.
No, I just want to
Oh my god! I feel like
There's an
I'm
immersion
literally
in the
right
car.
there.
And you might be wondering, is this our future, right? Like, are we going to be all sitting in rooms together, but we're all experiencing a very different reality because of technology like this? And I'm here to tell you today, the reality is, in some ways, we're already there. And I don't mean because of technology, and I don't mean because of cell phones and the internet. I actually mean because of our minds. Because of the way we experience reality in our minds. So much of what we think of as reality is subjective, not objective. Right now, in this room, let's say there's 60 of us in this room. And the beautiful thing about that is that there are 60 different experiences of this one moment. I think it's a really beautiful thought. It can also be an overwhelming thought, right? There's a diversity of perspectives, right? And this diversity can feel like a kaleidoscope, right? Like one person's phone's going off, someone else had their phone on silent, you know what I mean? Like, no, I'm just kidding. You're the only person I know I can tease. So we have these subjective experiences, and it can be a kaleidoscope, a tapestry, a rainbow of all these different ways of seeing the world, experiencing a moment. It's quite a gift. At the same time, it might be overwhelming to think, how could we possibly hope to experience common ground when we all experience reality in such different ways? Now, our spiritual paths, they've spoken to this, and they really spoke about this even though they didn't have the modern understanding of our brains that science has provided us. They still have spoken extensively about illusions, about perceptions, and ultimately about waking up from them. So in this series, Reality Check, what my hope is that we can bring together an understanding of our brains, an understanding of our world, as we've been given through modern science, and at the same time, merge that with some spiritual principles in order for us to better define reality. And as Kathleen said, what are we talking about when we're talking about reality? Maybe we can wake up to a fuller, deeper, truer experience of reality together, right? So the goal would be, throughout this series, that we would find a place inside of ourselves to become kinder, right? More loving, more gentle, more open-minded, more open-hearted, right? How many of us would be able to say that in those moments when we're not at our best, right, when we're not experiencing the best of who we are, it's probably because we're holding really tightly to how we think things are versus being open, right, to other perspectives. And so what do? How do we address this? Well, we can start by checking our reality. How do we do that? I think it requires us to be humble enough to hold our perspectives to the light, right? To challenge our beliefs, to challenge our own beliefs and question our own assumptions that we might clear the lens of our mind, right? The dictionary calls a reality check something that clarifies or serves as a reminder of reality, often by correcting a misconception, right? So we acknowledge, we address these misconceptions that we've become so accustomed to. It reminds me of what philosopher Joseph Roux has said: our experience is composed rather of illusions lost than of wisdom acquired, right? So we're trying to get rid of the illusions. Maybe it's not so much something you add, but something you take away, which is very much in line with what the Indian saint, spiritual guru Ramana Maharshi said: realization is not acquisition of anything new, nor is it a new faculty. It is only removal of all camouflage. So we think about these misconceptions, we think about these illusions, we think about the camouflage, right, that has so often covered over our reality. It's like a cloud layered on top of our spiritual, emotional, and psychological vision. How many of us know that here in the summertime in Tucson, it's good to visit a car wash pretty regularly? Right? I've become, for the first time in my life, I've become like a regular patron of the car wash moving here. I'm proud to share that I am part of the unlimited member club at Mr. Car Wash, or Limited Wash Club, and I'm not even paid to say that. It's a new level of commitment in my life to say this is my car wash, and I'm gonna, And I love going through the car wash because there's that moment when, the suds and all the water and the brushes first come down and you're like, here we go, clean time, And I love seeing all that dirt clear away from the windshield. And I realize how, gosh, it was dirtier than I even knew, right? We sometimes drive around not realizing how dirty our windshield is because we look through it. We need to, right? So we don't recognize the dust and dirt that is covered over this lens that we need in order to see the world. And I think the same is true of our minds, of our hearts, that there is dirt and dust that accrues over our realities that we don't even recognize. So this is the beauty of checking those realities, right? And today, that dirt, that dust, that we're going to be looking at are cognitive biases. Cognitive biases. These are these processes that we engage in inside of our brains that allow us to simplify the act of thinking, right? There are these tools, these tricks that our brain uses to make quick decisions, to turn thinking into something that doesn't require as much energy. And the reality is, our brain is a little lazy. Cognitive psychologists have given a name for this. They say that we as human beings, we are cognitive misers. A miser is someone who, hoards or conserves or is selfish with something, right? When I hear that word miser, I cannot help but think of the heat miser and the snow miser from A Year Without a Santa Claus. Anyone remember these scary fellas, right? So that's our brain. That's a picture of your brain. No, our brains, they're cognitive misers, meaning that they're, one of the primary priorities of our brain is to conserve brain power, okay? Now this is an act that has actually helped us throughout our evolution. So there's some beauty to the fact that our brain is trying to hold on to its energy, but it's also meant that we engage in cognitive biases as a way of making thinking something that is easy, simple, and predictable rather than accurate and nuanced, right? So again, I'll say it again. Our brain often leans on easy, simple predictability, right, rather than accuracy and nuance. All right, when we look at our world today, do we have any kind of frame of reference for thinking that is easy, simple, and predictable over accuracy and nuance? It seems like it's so much a part of the dialogue and the anger and the tension and the frustration that we're dealing with right now in our world, right? And so these cognitive biases are these tricks, these tools that our brain employs in order to help it make snap decisions and to help it navigate a complex world. So what I want to do for a little bit is I want to kind of go through some of these. You're not going to be quizzed on it, don't worry. But I want to just give us all a chance to acknowledge how many of these we actually engage in on a daily basis. And the goal would be that we could recognize, wow, like look at all that has covered the lens of my reality, right? And maybe it would allow us to come into this conversation of reality check in a humble way, in an open way, right? And you might say, okay, that's okay for everyone else, but that's not me, right? I am not a biased person in the slightest, right? And if that's you, sorry to say, you've already fallen victim to the first one, the blind spot bias, which is a tendency to believe that we are more objective and less biased than most people, right? Or maybe you thinking, well, this idea that reality is subjective, no way. I know that my interpretation of reality is reality, right? Well, you've fallen victim to naive realism, right? And how couples out there, how much does naive realism become an issue in your relationship, right? You get into arguments and you're thinking like, I know I'm right. I remember exactly what I said and exactly what happened, right? And your partner's like, no, it did not happen that way. And you're like, ugh. And you're, of course, faced with that age-old decision. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I know what most of you choose. You choose to be right, so. All right. So if we're being honest, how often, when we're presented with new information, how often do we favor information that supports what we already believe and what we already know, right? This is called confirmation bias. It's a tendency for us to seek confirmation to our beliefs, right? Accepting that information that supports what we already believe, rejecting that which doesn't, right? I'm assuming there's a lot of round earthers in the building tonight. I don't like to assume, but I'm just going to go out on a limb. It's likely that you're probably not going out there looking for flat earth information, looking for things to like reject what you already know. But I use a cartoonish example because in reality, think about how much confirmation bias plays into our political situation, right? There's just so many ways that we look for a confirmation of what we already know. All right. Moving on, next example, right? You go to a party or a social gathering, or maybe it's a place like this, right? And do you ever feel like people are looking at you and maybe they're having thoughts like maybe you think people are judging you, or maybe you think people think you're pretty cool and you're like, oh, everyone's looking at me and they think I'm pretty cool. Either way, we have this tendency as human beings, right, to, without realizing it, kind of place ourselves as the center of attention. This is known as the egocentric bias, right? We think people are thinking about us, right? Now, this can be positive, right? We can think people are thinking positive things about us. The reality is people probably aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. This can also be negative. You think people are judging you. And again, people are not thinking about you as much as you think they are. Or maybe you're on the other side of this and you think, no, I love people watching, right? Anyone who's like, oh, I'm a great people watcher. And so you kind of feel like, wow, I can just go into a situation, look at people, and kind of read what's going on in the room. I'm so perceptive, right? But all the while, you forget that people might be doing the same thing to you. This is called the cloak of invisibility illusion. And it's the tendency for us to think that we notice and observe people more than they notice and observe us, right? You ever stare at someone, not in a judgmental way, but you're just like really curious, 5 seconds go by, 10 seconds go by. You're like, this is getting in a really good stare here. I feel like I'm like getting their life story, just staring at them. I feel like I'm reading their mind a little bit, right? And then all of a sudden they look at you back and you're like, oh my God, I've been caught. Like, this is horrible. And you're just like, I can't be here anymore, right? Cloak of invisibility illusion. How about this, right? You open up a fortune cookie, okay? Be there with me in your mind, right? I had a fortune cookie this week. It was delicious. Get that flavor in your mind. And you open up that fortune cookie and it says, you are a nice person with who's overcome many obstacles, and you like Chinese food, and you're thinking, I am a nice person, wow, and I've overcome so many obstacles, and of course I love Chinese food, I'm eating it right now. You know, this is called the Barnum effect, and it's our tendency to take vague, all-purpose descriptions that might apply to anyone and relate to them. Now, I like personality tests, right, and different personality profiles. I think these things can be really helpful. I'm not discounting these things, but it's just a reminder to kind of take things with a grain of salt and remember to just have some discernment when you're looking at different things that might apply to who you are. All right. How many of us, if we're being really honest, we just tend to see the negative more than the positive? It can be a little easier. Come on, that's all of us. It's human beings. It's just going to be a little easier to see the negative than the positive. Negativity bias. Our tendency to focus more on potential threats than blessings. It's been said that as human beings, right, when it comes to positive things, that our mind is like Teflon, right? So positive things just slide right off. Compliments, right? Good things that happen in our day. But when it comes to negative things, our brains are like Velcro. And we know this to be true. At least speaking for myself, I know that 10 good things can happen in a day and one bad thing happens. What do you remember, right? What do you focus on and dwell on, right? This is the negativity bias. Okay. So we're in this time, right, which is very tense and very divided politically, sure. And wherever you sit in that spectrum, it's like that you look at people on the other side of the aisle who believe very differently than you, and you might think, well, even though we share 99.99999% of the same DNA, they might as well be like from another planet, right? They might as well be a completely other species. You probably think, wow, I have more in common with my dog than I do someone who has different political beliefs than me, right? I actually do have a lot in common with my dog, so that one doesn't really. But this, friends, is called the in-group, out-group bias. It's our tendency to divide people into groups, right? Where we exaggerate the differences. Much like confirmation bias, we look for the differences and we ignore and we deny the similarities, forgetting that you could see so many differences with another human being, and yet the ways that we are similar are always going to outnumber that. All right, this next one is my absolute favorite, okay? So you're driving down your favorite road, probably Oracle Road, and if you're watching online, that was a joke, okay? So you're driving down Oracle Road and someone cuts you off, okay? And your first thought is like, that is a terrible driver, probably a terrible person, okay? They need to have their driver's license revoked. Maybe they can retest for it in 5 to 10 years, okay? But they are just through and through a terrible driver, right? And then 10 minutes later, you cut someone off, and what do? You say, I had to. Like it was for safety reasons. I'm tired. I've had a rough week. Like I'm not. This isn't who I am. This is just. It was an accident, right? This, friends, is called the fundamental attribution error, where when it comes to other people's behaviors, right, that is who they are. And when it comes to your behaviors, it's always situational, right? So where we attribute these things changes depending on whether it's others or whether it's ourselves. In 1929, there were fears that the stock market was going to crash. It was part of the Great Depression. The stock market was very volatile, right? So there's a lot of fears that the market was going to crash. So what did people do? They pulled their money out, right, out of fear. And then what did the stock market do? It crashed, right? So people feared that it would crash. They acted as though it would crash. Therefore, it crashed, right? Does anyone know what this is called? There you go, self-fulfilling prophecy. Right, your $10 I'll give you later. So we have an expectation, right? That expectation influences our behavior. That behavior brings about a particular result, and then that result confirms what we believed from the beginning. This is also known as the Pygmalion effect, particularly in positions of leadership. So an example of this would be, imagine a school teacher who, for a particular student, she or he has a belief that this student will succeed, right? And so that belief changes their behavior towards the student, right? And then the student actually, their likelihood to succeed changes depending on the belief of the teacher. It also works in the negative, right? If you don't believe someone's going to succeed and your behavior changes, they would be less likely to succeed. It's another version of self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, moving on. So you leave here today, right? And someone asks you, what did you learn at Aldea? Like, how was the gathering? And you'd probably say, like, well, Jake just had this big list. He just went on and on. Well, they're like, well, can you give me, like, anything, like any image that stuck out to you? And it's probably likely that you would say, oh, well, I do remember a video of Olivia freaking out because she was wearing a VR headset, right? And the reason is because of the primacy effect, which is that information that comes first just tends to stick in our minds better. Right? This is why first impressions are so important to us, right? So if you ever go speed dating, right, and there's someone you have your eye on, just try not to go last, because it's like the primacy effect will tell you it's not going to go well for you. All right. These are all what we would call cognitive biases. I'm going to move into something called heuristics, which are very similar to biases, right? They're like these mental rules of thumb. So where biases look at larger patterns and frameworks, heuristics are more like shortcuts. They're these really quick decisions and snap choices that our brain makes, right? So for this next heuristic, I want to ask you a question. Okay, what do you think is a more likely way to die, all right? A shark attack or an airplane part falling from the sky and hitting you? Okay, how many people would say shark attack? How many people would say airplane part? How many people would say maybe it's about the same? Okay. I realized as I was writing this that with everything going on with Boeing, it probably wasn't the best time to use this example. But generally, people say shark attacks. And the reason is because of the availability heuristic. And what this means is that we tend to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily we can bring examples to mind. So we never hear news stories of airplane parts just randomly falling from the sky and hitting someone on the head, but we tend to hear about shark attacks because it's a vivid image, right? And it's something more newsworthy. And so this is the availability heuristic. How many of us would say that when making decisions, we trust our gut? And again, this requires some honesty. We trust our gut, and then maybe later we try to find the logic or rationality in our decision. But a lot of times the decision-making comes from a place deep within, right? This is called the affect heuristic. And the affect heuristic is our tendency to make decisions based on feelings and emotions. And then perhaps we go back and we rationalize them, right? It's been said that the human being is not a rational animal, but a rationalizing animal, right? We tend to operate from feelings, from emotions, and then we rationalize in hindsight. How about this? The halo effect. Our impression of people might sort of create a halo around them where we see them in a particular way, and it changes the way that we perceive them, right? So a perception that someone is really put together as a strong leader or just, whatever, it overshadows anything they actually do. So this happens a lot with just leaders in general, is that people have a certain impression of the leader and they start to become blind to what that leader is actually doing, right? Or imagine, for example, you're at work, right? And your coworker is really, really kind and charismatic, very put together, all dressed really nice, and they have this halo effect about them where you just think, wow, they're so put together, right? And it might cause you to overlook the fact that they're actually terrible at their job, right? you make excuses for them. You're like, they're having an off day. It's an off week. All right, it's been an off month. All right, they're having an off year, but I know they're going to get it together, right? We can see how clouded our vision can be through all of these things. With everything that we're looking at so far, there's something that they have in common. And cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker speaks about it. He says, cognitive psychology tells us that the unaided human mind is vulnerable to many fallacies and illusions because of its reliance on memory for vivid anecdotes rather than systematic statistics. As I said before, our brain likes images, right? It likes things that it can remember easily and draw upon easily. It doesn't so much like nuance and statistics and really specialized data, right? And so the idea here is that everything that we're talking about is connected in one way or another to memory, right? To what we already have experienced. And if we know anything, we know that our memories are very fallible and very easily influenced. There was a study done where people were shown pictures of their childhood, and for each of the participants, they were shown a picture of them in a hot air balloon. Now, none of them had actually been in a hot air balloon. It was a doctored photo from their childhood with them photoshopped in. But they didn't know this, right? They were shown it within a group of other photos. 50% of the participants were able to essentially create a memory, right? They were pretty quickly able to recall something that never happened. This is why people confess to crimes all the time they didn't commit, right? Because under pressure, under duress, under manipulation, our memory is quite fallible. Now you might look at all this, you might say, this is all pretty bad news, right? This is a really depressing message. No. I promise there is a silver lining here. And it's that if we can be honest about all of this, right? If we can acknowledge the place that this holds in our lives and we can have some humility about it, recognizing that what you and I describe as reality might not be everyone else's experience of reality, then we can begin a journey towards a deeper experience of life and connectedness with others. And in order to do this, there are some things that feel paradoxical that we might need to hold at the same time. For example, we might need to hold the fact that all of these things are part of a process that our brain has been engaged in for many, many years throughout the history of humanity that has actually kept us alive, right? It's been a part of how our brain has evolved to be what it is. And at the same time, these can limit us because as we continue to evolve spiritually, emotionally, we need to acknowledge how these might get in the way of us experiencing reality, how these keep us asleep. May we wake up, right? And the other great thing about all of these parts of our thinking is that in order to address these, in order to check our reality, what we need to do, and all we really need to do, is focus on our own growth. We need to focus on ourselves. It's not about getting other people to change, right? It's not about you taking it all upon yourself to fix the world. Perhaps change begins with checking our own reality first. The Sufi poet Rumi says this: yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. This is resonant of something the Buddha said. It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Then the victory is yours. It cannot be taken from you, not by angels or demons, heaven or hell. Jesus said in John 8:32, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Right? Friends, this is a journey that begins within, right? About clearing our vision, about encountering truth together. And I wonder, how much joy have we missed out on because of things like the negativity bias, right? How much compassion have we not given because of things like the in-group and the out-group bias? How much judgment have we levied upon others because of things like confirmation bias, right? Or the fundamental attribution error. And at the same time, how much love awaits us, right? Not only for others, but for ourselves, if we can acknowledge and challenge our biases, right? Not destroying them, not getting rid of them, because we acknowledge that they also work to help us, but taking a more active role in how we recognize the workings of the mind, right? Rather than passively letting these things run the show. And so, friends, the invitation today and throughout this series is that we might become gentler with people that we disagree with. We might become less likely to jump to conclusions. And maybe this unknowing or this, limitation that we can recognize that our brain has, right? It's not something that we need to resolve. Maybe it's something we can rest in, we can accept, right? Because in a time where things feel so rigid and dualistic, right? In a time where the big questions are you in or are you out, right? Are you for us or are you against us? Now more than ever, I think we need to check our own realities, right? And for me, I wonder, what if doing so might actually bring some peace, right? And might actually bring some ease, not just over the next 4 months, but over the next 4 years. And so, friends, may we check our own realities before pointing at others, right? May we experience reality through the removing of whatever stands in the way. And maybe remember that true change, it happens on the inside.